This podcast is created in partnership with Montclair. Nieves Meroy is an expert Italian mountain climber. She and her husband, Romano Bennett, have climbed all the 8,000ers without oxygen nor porters. When we asked her what she felt when reaching the summit of K2, she surprised us. She said that no other mountain ever gave her the same feeling. She and her husband both kneeled, grateful for having made it. It's not so much a feeling of achievement as it is one of peaceful belonging. The mountain truly gave us a gift. These words teach us how difficult it is to express what it feels like to make it onto that peak. You look around yourself and realize that there's nothing left to climb, no more paths to follow. All that's left is the sky. 70 years ago, two Italians conquered K2, the second highest summit in the world. In this podcast, we tell their story to understand how important it was for an entire country. I'm John Vincent, and this is K2, Like Going to the Moon, a Cora Media podcast. Let's go back 70 years to 1954. Shortly after conquering the summit, the weather starts to worsen at the base camp. For a few days, K2 is covered by clouds. In Desio's words, it's as if we've angered it. There's no time to lose. The climbers are impatient to make it back home. The truth is that they're exhausted. They have nothing left to give. It's been 65 days from their arrival at the base camp. Of these, only 4 days of clear, including the historic day in which they made it to the peak. For the rest, they've had to struggle against high-altitude blizzards and storms. If they made it, it's only thanks to their skill and sense of sacrifice, their experience and teamwork. On August 10th, a caravan of 60 porters reaches the base camp as it's about to be disassembled. Before making their way down, the climbers visit the tomb of Pusho one last time and place a stone in his memory. Then, they abandon camp and make the trek back. Mahdi's feet are frozen, so he'll have to be carried on a stretcher. It takes the porters and mountaineers 6 days to reach the village of Ascoli, where they can finally rest in the green nature, enjoy the shade of the poplar trees, and eat ripe apricots. To speed up their return, they brave the currents of the Shiga River on old wooden rafts supported by air-filled goatskins. It's a risk, but it all works out, allowing them to reach the confluence with the Indus River near Skardu, the capital of Baldistan, where the local population celebrates them with a parade. At this point, the men and their equipment are loaded onto planes for Rawalpindi. Once they land there, the real celebrations begin, with the people, local governors, and Western expats all cheering on the Italians. Once in La Forêt, the General Governor of Pakistan presents a gold medal to all the members of the expedition. And what follows is yet another explosion of cheer, celebration, dance, and clapping. At this point, a few members of the expedition would like some peace and quiet and to get away from it all. But there's simply no way out of it. And again, the same happens in the then capital of Pakistan, Karachi, where the local colony of Italians pitch in as well. On September 3rd, Achille Compagnoni, Dr. Guido Pagani, Ubaldo Re, and Mario Fantin board their plane to Milan Linate Airport, where they'll be welcomed by a crowd of cameras, reporters, and bystanders. Just a week later, all the other members of the expedition take the motor vessel Asia, which sails to the Mediterranean and docks at Naples first and then Genoa. Here, they'll meet friends and relatives and a giant crowd of exuberant fans. In the following weeks, a wave of popular enthusiasm shakes all of Italy, and the K2 climbers become national heroes. It's the type of celebration that not even a World Cup victory can bring about. And like a charm, in the bars and clubs of the whole country, everyone is suddenly a mountain climbing expert, arguing over high-altitude climbing techniques and oxygen tanks. The newspapers call the climbers the heroes of K2, and they're treated like such wherever they go. Meanwhile, the media continues to fan the flames. The successful endeavor is front-page news on August 4th, and the newspapers are pretty heavy-handed in their rhetoric. Then, the K2 expedition is on the covers of every magazine for weeks. The Italian national radio company, RAI, opens the 1 o'clock news with these words: Scardo, according to a message from the porters, the Italian mountain climbers have reached the summit of K2. The newly christened television, on the other hand, just mentions it briefly, and the first actual reports will have to wait until 1955. After all, TV requires images, and those are still under embargo and waiting to be edited for the film. But it's not just the newspapers, the radio, and the newsreels. K2 mania sweeps advertising as well. Photos, drawings, or even just mere mentions of the mountain are used to advertise cookies, soups, watches, glasses, boots, shirts, typewriters, and even cheeses. Everything that the mountaineers brought with them for their mission. And that's not all. There's also a K2 snowy sparkling wine, and even a hunting gun powder, which uses the name and outline of K2. The Ezio Fiori company, which already produced a mountain climbing rope with that name, tried to stop the avalanche of product placements in its tracks ahead of time by warning, before the expedition even commenced, against companies producing sports clothes and equipment and putting the K2 brand on their products, even if used in the expedition. But to no avail. There's a deluge of patent requests for every type of product. For example, on the 6th of August, 2 days after the announcement, there's one for a type of fabric called K2. And even ahead of the expedition itself, on the 8th of April, while the mountain climbers are just setting foot in Pakistan, there's one for a vast selection of K2 candies. And that's not all. In Italy, K2 is used as the name for a cavalcade of cafes, ice cream parlors, dry cleaners, and car washes, as well as countless hotels, especially on the Adriatic coast of Italy. For example, the Igea Marina Pine Camp is now called K2 because on that day, while the managers were renovating, they heard the news on the radio. Today, there are still 371 businesses that have no intention of giving up their namesake, dedicated to the mountain of the Italians. While the Italians are adopting the K2 expedition as their own, Ardito Desio is tirelessly working on the official account of the adventure. It's released in record time by the end of December and published by Garzanti. It's impossible to say how well it sells, as a fire would later destroy the publishing house's archives, but it's almost certainly a bestseller, with reprints and re-releases up until 1957. There are also a dozen translations for publication in the USA and Russia. The rest of the team is less open in releasing official reports, though. It's not due to shyness, but because Ardito Desio precluded them from publishing anything for at least 3 years. And this is exactly the same period in which the controversies start coming to light. Besides the complaints of Bonatti, which we mentioned in the previous episode, there were also clashes between the Italian Alpine Club and Desio, as well as between members of the expedition and the institutions. The story of K2 starts to cool off, to the point that the enthusiasm itself will have to wait again until decades later for the 40th and 50th anniversaries. And what about today? Mountain climbing has changed a lot in the past 70 years. Nowadays, even those with less training can face mountains that used to be impossible for humans to even consider. It's been 70 years since the summer of 1954. Many climbers have returned to K2, marching high up in Karakorum, which back then appeared to be a remote and unapproachable locale, far removed from all life, and not only in a geographical sense. New ways have been opened up, and in 2021, 10 Nepalese mountain climbers managed to complete the long-awaited first winter climb. The dream of pioneers today has taken on a different hue. The modern world has left its mark up there even, at the highest altitudes, and not always for the better. After 1954, it will be 6 years before anyone else tries to repeat the climb of K2. In 1960, a German-American expedition makes the attempt, but unsuccessfully. We'll have to wait until 1977 for someone to match Compagnoni and Lacedelli, when 6 Japanese and a Pakistani finally matched the endeavor. In these 70 years, about 700 mountaineers have made the climb, and 96 people have died in the attempt. The numbers are high, and they're bound to go up. In 2018, a record 62 climbers reached the mountain peak, while this year, the Pakistani government has given out 175 permits. Because the Karakorum giant still holds all its charm. Like the story that we've just told you, the story of that incredible first ascent and of the men that made it possible. Don't miss an episode of this series. Click on follow, and most importantly, hit the bell and rate 5 stars on Spotify. K2, Like Going to the Moon, is a Cora Media podcast, created in partnership with Moncler. It is written by Leonardo Bizzaro, Roberto Mantovani, Vinicio Stefanello, Luca Calzolari. The voice is by John Vincent. Editorial care is by Marco Villa, with the support of Sarah Poma. Translation is by John Vincent. Sound and music supervision is by Luca Micheli. Post-production and editing is by Cosma Castellucci. Sound engineer is Luca Possi. The project manager is Silvia Arcidiacono Mutti. The producer is Alex Peverengo. Post-production coordination is by Matteo Scelsa. Editorial support, Valeria Luzzi.